Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. This is episode 562. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility through this podcast since 2005. Today, I'm chatting with returning guest, the lovely Flora Bowley, about her new book, The Art of Aliveness, a creative return to what matters most. Learn how to be a work in progress and a stunning masterpiece at the same time. Ways to incorporate more creativity into your daily life. And some really thoughtful questions to ask yourself. Before we dive in, a few reminders. Hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit KimberlyWilson.com/podcast for more. And if you're new to Tranquility du Jour, a big welcome, and you can learn more at KimberlyWilson.com/new. And the show notes for this episode can be found at KimberlyWilson.com/562. So this weekend, there are a lot of things happening, and it's kind of the finale, really, for 2021. I've got the Fall Virtual Retreat, and that is on Saturday, October 16th. And we're going to be exploring the whole idea of softening the fall, simplifying, slowing down, tuning in through reflection, some gentle yoga, definitely some creative play so you can engage with your art of aliveness and more. Now, the following day, on Sunday, is our next TDJ style pop-up. So in this virtual event, I'll be showing how to create a capsule wardrobe, how to mix and match yours, how to transition your summer wear into winter wear. Fall and winter wear, really. And also, everyone who signs up will get a discount to shop locally sewn, eco-friendly TDJ for the next few days. And then also you'll get the replay. So, and a really cute workbook. And a Spotify playlist. So if you are interested, definitely sign up. There is a link in the show notes. Also, the last thing that I'll be offering this year is the annual program happening next year that gives you access to all things tranquility, including weekly lessons, all sorts of yumminess. So you can join the waitlist. There's a link for that also in the show notes. Now, without further ado, our lovely Flora is an artist, gentle guide, and the author of 4 books: Brave Intuitive Painting, Creative Revolution, Fresh Paint, and The Art of Aliveness. Guided by a belief that we all have infinite wells of creative potential just waiting to be tapped and remembered, Flora's popular in-person retreats and online courses have empowered a global network of brave painters while creating a new holistic movement in the intuitive art world. No big deal. She's basically amazing. In her recent book, The Art of Aliveness, Flora explores the vast ways in which the principles of creativity can serve as fuel for a more alive and awakened way of living in the world. No paintbrushes required. She lives and creates in the lovely Portland, Oregon. And I have to say, I first met Flora in 2011? I believe it was 2011, Squam, which is this beautiful art retreat that happens in New Hampshire. And anyway, we happened to be in the same kind of large cabin, and we were all sitting around one evening by the fire. And I was, rather than just kind of sitting by the fire, I was going through magazines and pulling out images of things that, I wanted to use for a future collage or art journal. And I remember Flora asking, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm tearing these out. I mainly just, take big images. So it's kind of cheating, but whatever. And she was so lovely. And she said, no, I love what you're doing. And, something along the lines of, it's very creative, right? I was simply tearing images from magazines. But that just stuck with me, of someone who is so encouraging and so sweet and so thoughtful. And it's been an honor to know her, my goodness, over a decade now. Welcome, Flora.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, welcome back. I'm like, is this your second or third interview on Tranquility du Jour?
I
I'm not
know it's been a
sure.
while though, right?
Yeah,
It's been a long
it
while.
it has. It's had it. It's so good to see you, and listeners. Although you won't see the video, we do get to look at each other, and there's something lovely about that because I used to always do these recordings via Skype, right, and not video, just audio. So it's really lovely to be able to see my guests.
Yeah, I like it too.
So, okay, congrats on this amazing new book, The Art of Aliveness, a creative return to what matters most. So beautiful. So, tell us about this new book. Like, what led you to write
Mm.
this one, which is so different, I feel like, from your previous ones and so rich?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a totally different kind of book. I mean, I worked with a different publisher. It's definitely more of a, I guess what would be called a self-help book. There's just words and no pictures. So that's really different than my other books, which were, painting books and more about how to paint and all of that. So this really came out of 12 years of sharing my approach to intuitive painting and more years of just being a painter myself. And over those years, realizing how the principles that drive the creative process are really the same things that help us to live our lives. And that has become increasingly more and more interesting to me, maybe even than the painting itself. I still love to paint and probably always will, but I just find it really fascinating to be able to glean these same kinds of ideas and apply them to our daily life. And so I had been, really thinking about that and sort of feeling like there was a book in there for a long time. And then my publisher, who I did an event with in Santa Fe, so I taught at an event called the Gathering of the Creatives, which is actually happening next week again in person. He approached me and said, I really want you to write a book, and I want it to be about how creativity, teaches us about life. And I thought, well, there you go. That's exactly what I want to do. So there was this really beautiful alignment, and then I just dove in, and it's a book, as you know, that shares a lot of personal stories as a way of, sort of making the points that I'm trying to make. And so it did become this real, like, excavation of my life and really trying to pull out the stories that felt most poignant. And then also all of my years of painting and just trying to mine the gems of like, what are the things that I've learned by painting for 25 years that I can share in a way that will be helpful for other people who don't necessarily need to paint for 25 years. It's like if we do anything for that long, we learn a lot about it. And so I just, I saw this book as an opportunity for me to share what I've learned from that experience because I know it's a unique experience to do something for that long and to go that deep into it. So that's the art of aliveness. Yeah.
Well, and to go that deep into it and to be teaching others, also. So it's
Yes.
not like you've just been an artist, in your loft painting, which is lovely, but you've also been a teacher of it and walking others through the process for many years.
Yeah, and so much of the learning about the process has come from sharing it, right? Because if I learned what I learned from doing it, but then when you share it with hundreds of people and you see, oh wow, this is what they're getting from it, and this is what they're getting from it, and then you start to see these major themes coming forth. There was like a whole nother layer of learning for me that came from teaching, which has been so beautiful.
So early on in the book, you clarify that the art of aliveness is not about being our best self, but rather becoming a more honest, inquisitive, and ever evolving version of ourselves, a work in progress, and a stunning masterpiece all at the same time. I love that. And yeah, it's not like live your best life, which is great, right? But it's like, how do we get curious, honest, authentic? So tell
Yeah.
us more about that, about how you came to define this.
Yeah, well, that comes, straight out of the painting process also, because what I would see and what I've also experienced myself as a painter is that when we're trying to make a painting, like look really good and be really pretty and have all of these qualities that we think are going to make it worthy, right? What often happens is that the sort of the life force of the painting gets sort of uh, beaten out of it almost because we're trying so hard to make it perfect. And when we actually just, I do this exercise where I have people close their eyes. I do this a lot myself too. We close our eyes and we just finger paint to really good music. And what happens in those moments is that the expression on the canvases is so real and raw and beautiful, like really beautiful because it's not trying to be anything. It's not trying so hard. And that is a theme I just see all the time in a visual art process is when we're trying so hard, it actually doesn't serve the painting. It kind of, like I said, it kind of takes something away from it. And so that to me is such a parallel in life. It's like when we're trying so hard to keep this image or be everything to everyone, and everything has to look a certain way. And maybe those are things that society has told us that we need to, be or do, is that we're actually not living our authentic truth. We're trying to fit into some other kind of box. And so to me, it's just a really juicy parallel that I see in life. And I find personally that when I meet people that are just real and raw and messy and beautiful, just like those paintings we did with our eyes closed, is like those are the people I'm want to be around. That feels really rich and alive to me. Whereas sometimes if, there's everyone's kind of putting on some pretense or something, I am not as attracted to that. And so it's just this exact same thing in art. I feel like when I see art and it's got that like life force in it where I'm like, wow, something really real happened. There was maybe a struggle here at some point, but that eventually got resolved. Like that's the stuff that I'm like, ooh, like I want to go look at this one for a while and spend some time with this one. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Well, yeah, and isn't it interesting? I mean, we as humans, I think we are kind of drawn to the dark, shadowy side of things because it helps us feel less alone, potentially.
Mm, yeah, I think we're drawn to it, but then there's also like there's it can be easy to resist that,
Totally.
like resisting experiencing grief or just kind of pushing things down. I mean, I'm from the Midwest where like we did not like emotions like that were not really so allowed, So I've been on like a lifelong journey of really like letting myself go into all of the layers of human experience, if you will. And there's a whole chapter called Embrace the Layers, I believe it's called. And it's the same with, there's that fun parallel with the paintings where, I do this layering process in my paintings. And what happens is that they go through these really like awkward stages when I'm pushing into territory that is not known, right? Like I know I can paint a pretty painting because I've been painting and I have those sort of signature dance moves and I can just be like, there, it's pretty. But those paintings lack something. When I am out on the edge of like, this is a little scary and unknown, and I've never used this color, I've never done this thing, or now I'm going to throw a bunch of black on the canvas and see what happens. Those paintings that go through these layers of experimentation and again, just that honesty and curiosity in the end have so much more depth and you can really feel that richness, I feel like, in those paintings. And it's the same in life, right? If someone's really been to like the depths and been gone through life in this way that is just like showing up for the full spectrum of what life is, which is not always easy, right? There's a depth in those people. And so yeah, it's a beautiful thing, I think that I crave more of that.
Well, I find it interesting. Remind me where you are from in the Midwest.
Oh, I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, because I'm just curious because I would think some listeners may also be like, how do we get more in touch with our
Mm.
feelings, particularly, right, if that wasn't encouraged growing up and it's not like we're
Yeah.
taught how to do that as adults. And so what would you say allowed you to be, I mean, maybe art, but to begin to get more in touch with your emotions and express them?
Oh, it's a great question. I think there's a few things for me. One is that I've really sought out people that are in touch with their emotions and are living that way already. A lot of my close friends just are that way. And so just being around them is like, oh, thank you. You're helping me by crying in the middle of this conversation or whatever it is, right? But I've also for myself, I've learned that I have to actually cultivate sort of the space in my life to really go there. Like I've noticed personally, and we're all so different, but for me, I lost my mom 6 years ago, and so that's been a real, grief and journey for me. And I realized that I was really good at just pushing it down and that I could just kind of carry on, and that what I actually needed to do was create experiences for myself where I was able to just fully melt into grief. And so for me, painting was a huge tool, like you said, like just music on, candles going, me and paint, all the doors closed, like a very solitary experience, and just letting myself cry and dance and paint it out. Like that was something that really became a healing process for me. And I would know going in, like, this is what we're doing. And it's not something that I would really necessarily look forward to, but I would know that the catharsis of that was so needed and that I would feel lighter at the end. And I did every time. And so sometimes that would be like going on a long hike and just like letting myself really be thinking about my mom a lot and like having things kind of come up. I also had the privilege of experiencing a grief ritual with Saban Fusome, who's now passed, but she was an African woman who was sharing her village's way that they grieved, and they would all come together and do this ritual with altars and every drumming and chanting and just everyone's grieving there. Like you come to the ceremony if you need to grieve. And so she was sharing that with people here, and I did one in Oregon, and it was just wow, what a different thing, right? Like that's not what we're taught. We're taught that, okay, you grieve for this little bit of time and then you like get over it, right? And this was just everything was welcome. And I found I was really nervous going because like I said, I'm usually like, okay, close the door and now have your time. But I made myself go, and I found that the energy of everyone being in that space together just gave me so much permission that I was like, I've never wailed, I don't think, like I did there, where I just let it all go. And I was just a total mess of tears and emotion and like in a pile on the ground. And that's definitely not my natural thing to do, right? And it felt so good. It was just this beautiful thing because the person next to you is doing the same thing. And then there's a tradition there where somebody comes behind you and just holds space if you're up at the altar having some grief happening. And so there's always someone behind you. You don't know who it is. I never even really looked, but there was like a presence, which was really beautiful. And I don't know. So that work is out there. I mean, there's people carrying on her teachings. And I just think, yeah, there's a book I'm reading right now called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And I'm reading it like again because I've read it before, but it's Francis Weller. And it's such a beautiful book about grief and really how grief and aliveness are connected. And I think I really got that through writing this book. Like the more I got into the writing process, the more I realized, wow, so many of the things that we often avoid in life are actually the things that make us feel the most alive. The things where we're going into some territory that feels new, or we're putting ourselves in an uncomfortable situation. Like those are also the moments that we feel alive and that we often learn, and going through hard things and making it through to the other side. And so it was interesting to me to realize that there were big themes in the book that came through around that. And not to say it's like a book about grief, because it's not, but it's, that's a thread that's in there. And that was something that surprised me even.
Well, grief is such a transformative experience, right? And so that makes sense. And I remember that. I know that was a really hard time for you, of course. Um, and so, And listeners, I'll also put a link to Wild Edge of Sorrow. Thank you for that recommendation. So I love this piece also. How can my life become a thoughtful and poignant work of art? How can my works of art be fueled by my soul's deepest longings for truth and beauty? How can my life and my creative offerings become seamlessly connected to one another? I think everyone wants the answer to this. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you think that might be?
Yes. So, I noticed over the years of both being a painter and then teaching that I often sensed that there was this disconnection between our lives and then our creative practices. Like where it's like, okay, now I'm going into the studio and now I'm going to do the art thing. And I'm going to, fill that well of my life's need. But I'm just curious. I've been naturally curious over the years and more so about how can it all start to feel really connected where there's not this line where I'm living or I'm making art because of the fact that I feel like there's so many really interesting parallels there. And so what I've been, working on, practicing, exploring for a lot of years now is how can each day, what if I approached my day as a work of art? What does that look like? And if something just popped into your mind, listeners, when I said that, like that's the thing, because it's different for everybody, right? But for me, it's like more mindfulness around just how I even keep my environment. I really like to make my home feel really artful, and I get to live inside this sort of creative bubble. It's also about how I move through the world, when I go on walks, I'm often taking photos or I'll do little sketches, or I'm just noticing and sort of really tuning into my senses in a way that I don't think we often naturally do. It's more of a choice, right? I'm going to feel the air on my skin. I'm going to touch the leaves that I'm feeling drawn to on my walk. I'm just going to sort of engage in this more sensual way with the world. So that's something that I love to play with. And then just knowing that even within relationships, there can be so much artfulness and creativity and what we bring, and often it means getting out of our habits is something I've noticed, and that's a parallel with painting too. It's like I'm always trying to get out of my habits. I want to be doing new things, and habits are good, as a baseline of like, oh, I have these skills and I'm comfortable here. Great, that's also valuable, but and in life too, it's like, great, we have our routines, we have our comfort places, we have some things that feel really known. And that's really important for our nervous systems and for just our comfort. But when we can also be stuck in them, right? We can also, wake up one day and go, wow, there's not a lot of newness happening. There's not a lot of sort of spark or inspiration. And I think that's something that a lot of people have been feeling up, because of this time we've been in, where a lot of us have been home and not able to go out and get inspired in maybe the ways that we used to. It's like we have to be extra creative now to create experiences for ourselves that make us feel alive still. And so I think that's a really just a fun inquiry to think like, well, what would make me feel more alive? And there's one part of my book where I talk a whole chapter about contrast. And that it's called Contrast is Crucial. And that speaks to this sort of rub of bringing things that are new together with maybe older things. And that could be like new relationships, or I'm going to just take a walk in a different route around my neighborhood, or I'm going to eat a different food, or I'm going to wear a different color. It can be just simple things like that. But the idea is that we're bringing in something different. Maybe it's just listening to different kinds of music. All of a sudden there's this like, oh, something's new here, and it brings aliveness into that moment. So there's so much you can play with honestly, with all of those categories that I just mentioned.
Yes, well, I love it because my next question kind of leads into it, where you give some ideas, right? And you encourage readers to reflect on the many ways we already infuse our daily lives with creativity, Rich. And you give some ideas of seeing bird silhouettes against a stormy sky, adding pops of color to our outfits, preparing foods and learning about a new culture. So, as you mentioned, a new type of food or a new recipe or a different way of pulling your favorite recipe together, stringing words together, writing, in a book or in a journal, and visualize ways the world, I loved this one, might be a more equitable place for all beings. It's like, I love that because it's not just like, oh, let's add a pop of color with our scarf to our all black outfit, which is lovely. But it's also like, okay, and what else can we be doing on a bigger scale from a creative way of just visualizing how things could be different and what steps can I take to move us toward that. So can you just speak to that? Because I thought this was just a really beautiful kind of list of things that, shift from what we eat to how we dress, to what we see in the sky, to what we see bigger picture.
Yeah. What comes to mind is this retreat I taught a couple years ago. It was down in Santa Cruz, and they were having a big wildfire in the area, and we weren't even sure if the workshop was going to happen because of it, and then it did, and we only had a few people, and I remember thinking, like, is it really, like, are we really going to spend a week talking about doing art things and creativity when, like, the world is literally burning around us, right? But we did. We came together and we did practices. We did writing and painting and so many different things, nature experiences and all of it. And what happened that I thought was really interesting was that at the end of the week, we had a sharing circle around just, how we were feeling, what we got from the experience. And what I think just everybody said in different ways was, I'm feeling so inspired to go create this, organization that's going to help in this way, or I'm going to put this thing together for, helping the fire victims. And, everyone had this, like, their cup was full from the practices that we were doing. And so the energy to serve in a greater way was available to them. And it was such a just great, display of, like, why that creativity is not this frivolous thing, this thing that we're just like, oh, it's like another way to do self-care and, just for us to feel better, which it is that also. But I think we're living in this time when, oh my gosh, I mean, our world is changing right before our very eyes. Systems are crumbling, and we're in a very chaotic moment in life. And and actually doing practices that create more resilience in terms of our ability to be spontaneous. And that's something that I love about creativity, is it really strengthens those muscles of, like, learning how to pivot, right? Because it's inherent in the creative process. And so we're strengthening all of these muscles, and really what creating a piece of art does is that it puts the power back in our lives. It's like, oh, I created that. I chose every color. I chose every mark. I was the one that created something out of nothing. And so if I did that, I can maybe start to remember that I can create my life also, right? And that we're really reminding ourselves of this innate ability we have to create the life we want to live. And with that comes our ability to create, goodness in the world, and to serve others, and to be a force of change and good, which is, I think, we all hands on deck right now for that, right? We need everybody to be being able to plug in different ways to move forward right now. So yeah, I find that really fascinating. I remember coming out of art school and thinking, oh, all my art has to be about some statement I'm making about some political thing, or I have to it has to really mean something. Like, that's kind of what they drill into you in art school. And I was always just more in this camp of, like, I'm just creating from my heart, and I struggled with that. And I really struggled with, but it's supposed to mean something, and it's supposed to change the world or something. And then I realized, after, like, honestly years of painting, that the act of painting intuitively and being present and learning about change and, this empowerment piece that I was just talking about was changing me. And by changing me in all those ways, that's what does change the world, right? It's when we are coming from that place of feeling more, yeah, more aligned with our truth and more connected to our intuition and all those things that art helps us do. So that was like a real light bulb moment for me. It was like, oh, it does change the world, but not in that way that I was maybe taught in art school. So it's all really, I could just talk about that stuff all day long.
Well, I just love it. I just was like, oh, what a wonderful, I mean, what a juxtaposition from, recipes and birds in the sky and pops of color to your outfit to like, changing the effing world, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved how you incorporated all of that into that paragraph. And one of the things too, kind of in the book that I'm remembering is, and this is always just such a great tool called like affirmative writing, all sorts of different names, visualization, of course, but it's like really thinking about what is your ideal day? What are you wearing? What are you eating? Who are you with? That sort of thing. And so I'm wondering, how does taking time to really get clear on that tie into the art of aliveness, or how have you seen it kind of play out maybe in your clients or in yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it kind of circles back to that conversation about habits, where it's really just easy as humans to get in our habits and do things over and over in the same way. And so I think doing a practice like I have in the book, or a visualization where you're really encouraged to dream big and think, well, what if I was really that in the book is about, like, if I was living my most creatively alive life, what does that actually look and feel like? Like, where am I living and what am I creating and how is it affecting people and who are my friends? All of those things, right? And I don't think we often give ourselves the space to just dream like that, right? Because we're just trying to get through the day, you know? We're just so much just to deal with life that often that dream space is really neglected. But I think there's so much power in giving ourselves that chance to just go, wow, I didn't even realize that what I really wanted to be doing was this. And then it doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, suddenly you're going to do that thing, because that might be too big of a leap, but it can mean that all of a sudden you start to orient yourself in that direction. If you realize that, oh, I really want to be living on the ocean, I really want that. It's like, well, maybe you can start playing ocean sounds, as you're painting, or something that like just at least starts to bring these things into your life. Yeah, so I love that exercise, and I think it's I get a lot of good feedback on it, because people are just like, wow, that is something. There's this whole part of me that I didn't even realize was wanting to be, and so people can really yeah, take little nuggets from that and then start to bring them into their life.
Well, I love too kind of what you're saying, because it is, especially now, like just surviving, right? Getting through the day and what have you. And so to actually hit the pause button and be like, okay, what do I really want? Now, what do I really, really want? Can seem like indulgence, and yet it's critical, right? Because otherwise, what do? We keep doing what we've always done. Well, then we keep getting the same results. And so it's like, how do we regularly, I think, pause and ask ourselves those questions? Really, really powerful.
And I think, COVID and the pandemic has given a lot of us an opportunity to do that, because we've had this pause, this great pause, right? For many of us, not everybody, of course, but for many of us, there was a pause. And in that, I think, we were talking before we started recording. For me, I spent most of the pandemic alone. I live alone. I'm single, I don't have kids. And so what I really realized was like, wow, I do not want to do this life alone. I do not. And so I'm in the process of creating like a new reality for myself where I'm like banding together with some friends and like we're gonna do a big project and live together and all of this. And it's just like that came from that ability to pause and realize, wow, I don't want to do it this way anymore. Because the reality is, and then we die, right? And then we do it the same way and we do it the same way and then we die. And so, I think many of us have sort of woken up to this like this just preciousness of it all and the fleetingness and wow, if not now, when? When are you going to make these changes? Because life can change really quickly. We've all learned that this last couple years, right? And so I think there's this I had a friend the other day talk about the pandemic as this, he was relating it to farmers that let their fields lay fallow in order for the nutrients to build up again, right? They're not just like always growing in each field. And so he was saying, the whole world has been sort of in this fallow place of just stillness and reflection and building the nutrients, right? Hopefully. And now we're just kind of, well, and I know the world is very unpredictable still, but in many ways we're sort of like just coming out of that. And it's a really potent moment, it feels like, because now we're being asked to take all of what we've learned and then make the next choices. And so I don't know about you, but all of the people in my life are going through like major transformations right now. It is wild, like relationships ending, moving, new jobs, like letting go of so many different things. And I feel like I get goosebumps actually just talking about it because it's like we're suddenly in a place where change and transformation is like the air we're breathing. It's in the field. It's what's happening. And so there's a lot of momentum, I think. And it's almost like, okay, catch that wave and do the thing you want to do now, because I don't know, before this all happened, I feel like for anyone to make a big change, it was like going against the grain, right? Because most people were, trying to be comfortable and trying to have a plan and be stable and steady, and all of that was really more the norm. And big change was sort of like, wow, you're making a big change, okay. But now it's like all the cards are in the air, and a lot of us are making big changes. So I mean, there's obviously this has been such a tragedy in so many ways, but there is something really life-giving about this energy of transformation that's happening right now, if you can see it that way. And yeah, so lots to think about there, I think.
It's huge. And, I just think back to 2020 and it was ridiculous. I remember it was like January and I was like, oh my gosh, every weekend is like booked until fall. I had like 2 international retreats scheduled that were back to back. It was going to be a lot. I mean, it was just, oh my gosh, the intensity of it. And then to have to cancel everything in March. I mean, it was horrific. And yet it was the biggest blessing possible. And, I've made quite a few changes, right? And I'm in the process even now of reevaluating. And there's great data out there that I think says, is that 40% of Americans are looking at career changes or at least leaving their job. Maybe they'll go to a job that's in the same career, but they're, people are moving on. Mm-hmm. And Cal Newport, I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote Digital Minimalism and Deep Work. He's this great thought leader out of the DC area. I think he's a professor at Georgetown. Anyway, I think he's working on a book, or there was just an article that came out on career downsizing, right? People who are like, I've been doing XYZ, working all these hours, doing all this travel. It's like, no,
Actually, no.
no more. Right. And I think so. What you say is so powerful of this, like, and this leads me kind of to my next point, which I really loved in the book, is the reminder to begin again, right? And it's such a mindfulness thing of, of remembering to like say you're trying to eat better and you have, I don't know, it's random, but like a Twinkie for breakfast. All right. Okay. It's tasty.
Been there.
Been there. But then afterwards you're like, okay, doesn't mean my day is ruined. I'm going to begin again. And I feel like that's kind of where a lot of us are, as we're looking at next steps in our lives. So can you speak a little bit to like including begin again and again as an entire chapter?
Yeah, well, that's such, again, such a broken record here, but that's another philosophy in the painting process that is crucial because when you're creating a piece of art, as you know, when you add something, right? So you add a color or you change it, or in my case, you might turn the whole canvas upside down or something, it's a new painting now. And so we're always having that opportunity to see the newness of it and to begin again from that space, right? And so in life, anytime you make one of these changes, whether it's a big one or even a small one, it's sort of like rearranges the puzzle of your life. And the reminder there is just to look at it and then with honesty, ask yourself, well, is this working like this? Like, did this change actually, do I want to keep moving in that direction or am I going to maybe pivot and go do something else, let that go? And so I love that in the intuitive painting process, we're always just like shifting and adding and letting go and then reevaluating and there's this call to be honest with ourselves and there's a call to be present because it's one thing to just have a plan, whether it's a painting plan or a life plan, and then sort of just go through those steps and try to execute the plan, right? But the word execute is also means to kill something, right? And so as I think often in that the clamping down of a plan idea and then just going towards that, what happens is that you miss out on all of the sort of happy accidents, if you will, or the unknowns, the mystery, the things that you never could have predicted, or when you do something and you realize, you know what, I thought that was a good idea. I thought that's what I wanted to do, but that is not actually working for me. I mean, how often does that happen, right? And so this reminder of like just begin again, like just come back to sort of that neutral evaluation. Is this working? And knowing that you get to change. I think that's something that we're learning as humans and something that the painting process has taught me for years is like, no, I get to change my mind. I can really get excited about adding this face into this painting and I can add the face and then I can step back and I can go, oh yeah, no. That's not, that is not working, and I can let it go completely with paint on top, or I could turn it upside down and it becomes more interesting that way, or whatever it is, I get to change my mind. And I think that's a real muscle that we need to strengthen because otherwise we get so far down these roads that we don't actually want to be on. And we just realize, oh my God, I could, how did I get here? It's because I thought I was supposed to do it this way. I had that idea or somebody told me that at one point, and then now I'm here and it's not where I want to be. And so, yeah, to realize like, well, you can change now, you can begin again.
Such a good reminder and so potent, especially right now. People are like, well, I've invested so much time in my career or this relationship or this city. It's like, that's all right. You're still going to have that experience. It's still part of you. And yet now and always, we have a choice.
Mm-hmm. It's not wasted. I always say that there's no such thing as wasted paint, because some people do my process and they're like, I feel like I'm just wasting paint because I'm covering it over. And I'm just like, but it's all those layers underneath that are going to make the painting what it is in the end. And it's the same with life, even if you, change it up and let big pieces go. It's like, well, those pieces informed who you are and got you to where you are. Right. And so it's not wasted time or energy. But man, that's a hard one sometimes. I feel that.
Totally.
Yeah. Easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah. It's easy for us to be talking about it right now.
Yes.
But yeah, implementation, very challenging.
Yeah.
And, one other question I want to ask before my last one is you talk about in the book dancing between comfort and risk and flowing within structure. Love both of these. So can you just tell our listeners a little bit more about these?
Yeah, so the comfort and risk piece I spoke to a little bit when I was talking about, sometimes it's really good to have these comfortable things, these habits and, like our known factors, but then to recognize when we're stuck there, right? And then to kind of find that dance where we go out and do something that might feel a little like, ooh, this is new, right? And then we can come back to our comfort, right? And we can kind of like titrate like between those worlds. I think that there's a lot of aliveness that lives there. And then the piece about flowing within structure comes from, when I'm teaching painting and I say to people, anything is possible. Like you can choose any color and you can make any mark and do anything you want. Sometimes how that comes across is really overwhelming. Like when everything with anything is possible, it's like, well, then what the hell am I supposed to do? Right? I can do anything. And I think that's often true in life too, when we really are like trying to choose our careers or whatever we're trying to choose. Sometimes it can just be too much information, too many options. And that's a wonderful place to be in many ways, but it can also make us feel stuck. And so the idea is, and I often call it, the banks of the river, like creating banks of the river so that you can flow freely within a more constricted or limited sort of space. And so for painting, that might be I'm only going to work with blue on this layer, or I'm going to not allow myself to work with blue, so anything that sort of restricts what's possible. And then all of a sudden, you have to see what is still possible. And honestly, the pandemic did this for us. I mean, talk about banks of the river, right? It's like suddenly everything was restricted. So much of how we used to live wasn't available anymore. And so it was like a narrowing. And there was a lot of sadness in that, which is totally understandable. But I remember at one point really thinking about this during the the deep parts of the pandemic and realizing, oh my God, it's banks of the river. And so what if I just look at it that way and instead of looking at what's not possible, what's not available anymore, what if I look at, well, what is available now? What is available now still? And what is potentially available now that wasn't available before this happened? Right? Like, I think there was a lot of innovation that happened in the pandemic because we realized, oh, well, I can reach people this way, and people weren't open to hearing from me that way before, whether it was online things or whatever. And so I found that to be really life-giving when I sort of started to see what was happening with the pandemic through that lens of what's still available and what's available now that wasn't available before. And that's finding the flow within the structure.
Love these. I think it's really helpful and important. And as you say, it's great to have a lot of options, but then sometimes so many options, it's like decision fatigue. It's like you go to a diner with like 4 pages of options. You're like, yay, so many options. And you're like, I can't decide versus like a set menu where you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is so it is this interesting dichotomy. So my last question for you, Flora, which you have heard before, having been on the podcast, but the name of the podcast, Tranquility du Jour. So how are you finding tranquility in your everyday, especially right now when things
Mm.
are a bit chaotic?
I have to say my greatest source of tranquility right now is my garden. I've just really gone to town planting this beautiful garden of flowers and herbs and vegetables, and it is my happy place. And I've really that's been a gift from this time is that I've planted all that and that I've gotten into it. And it's like every day I kind of go out in the morning first thing and I walk around and I see all the things that are growing and I just have my tea out there. And oh my gosh, it's just been such a gift.
It does seem like that's something that people have really taken up during this, which I love.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And it's just it's like we need to be connecting to the earth right now. I think that is something we can probably all agree on is that there's a lot of healing that happens in that space and we've gotten really disconnected from it as humans, and so I think there is sort of a coming around, which I'm really happy about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us again today. And congrats on this gorgeous new book. And listeners, definitely check it out. You can find it on Amazon and possibly your website. I'll have a link to it, all that good stuff. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was really a lovely time to spend with you. I really appreciate it.
You can find Flora at florabowley.com, Instagram, Flora Bowley, Facebook, Flora Bowley Designs, YouTube, Flora Bowley Designs, Pinterest, Flora Bowley, and then there is a Spotify user also that you can find her at. All of these are linked in the show notes. Also, we mentioned in the podcast a book called Wild Edge of Sorrow. And this is by Francis Weller, who is a psychotherapist, an author, and a soul activist. He sounds amazing, and I think I'm going to have to pick up this book. Anyway, there is also a link to that. And finally, sign up for Love Notes if you're not yet subscribed, and I'll send you invites, inspiration, and more. There's also a link in the show notes to browse my 6 books and planner. Follow me on Instagram and YouTube. I'm going to be phasing out Facebook over the next bit, TBD. And then also there's a link to TDJ, my clothing line, for anyone who's interested, and to join us, of course, on Sunday. And finally, if you have a moment to share a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads, I would be so very grateful. So wishing you a delightful week ahead. Thanks for tuning in and inviting my guest and me into your day. Namaste.